I know this sounds quite obvious, but Jesus performed some pretty amazing miracles, didn't he? Yeah. Calming the storm with the word, raising Lazarus from the dead, turning 600 litres of water into wine. That's a good trick. John doesn't tell us how the party went after that. I'd be interested in knowing. The best wine till last. How did that party go? But sometimes it's in those quiet, unassuming moments that we see the depth of Jesus' love. Jesus being anointed at Bethany, meeting the woman at the well at midday, and here, having breakfast on the beach with his mates. It's actually an amazing scene, isn't it? Jesus, the risen Lord, King of Kings, making a fire. Didn't have smokeless fuel. His hands would have been dirty. Buying some fish, maybe from another fisherman further along the shore. Making a fire and then cooking fish for his mates. Jesus could have appeared in many different ways. He did, didn't he? Walking beside two of his friends on a road. He could, I guess if he'd have wanted to, risen King of Kings, why not enter Jerusalem on a second triumphal entry? Not with children waving palm branches, but with a company of heaven behind him. There would have still been pilgrims from Passover. What better way to get word out that you had risen from the dead than to appear on that pinnacle, top of the temple, highest place? But no, he chose to cook brekkie on the beach with his mates. So, what does that tell us about Jesus? What does that mean for each one of us here today? I love the way that John writes. He said, it happened this way. He was there. This is an eyewitness account. Simon Peter said, guys, I am going out to fish. I'm paraphrasing here, but it's something like, I've had it up to here. I've had enough. And every one of his mates say, well, we'll go with you. They still saw him as a leader. Even though he was on a wobble, they still followed him. They still saw him as a leader. And they got into their boat, fished all night, and they caught diddly squat. Absolutely nothing. Now, that is a strange thing to do, isn't it? They've already seen Jesus. This isn't the first time he's appeared to them. So why go out fishing? Maybe Peter was being really practical. The cross was seen as scandalous, wasn't it? Cursed is those who are hung on the tree. Maybe some of their supporters had bugged out. Those who had supported Jesus and his disciples over time, they maybe hadn't anticipated the cross and it was too scandalous. Maybe Peter was thinking, we need another miraculous catch of fish, like we read about in Luke's gospel. If we're to carry on this mission, maybe we need some resources. Maybe they just needed to clear their heads. Spiritually, they were out of their depth. That past 10 days, their emotions were all over the place. Maybe Peter wanted to get back to what he knew. Something familiar. The sound of the waves slapping on the side of the boat. The smell of the sails. The feel of the rope. They were in unfamiliar territory. Peter felt at home on the water. Maybe they were scared. Maybe the realization that they were hunted men had finally hit home. And what better place to hide in the middle of the sea? They'd fished all night and caught nothing. I guess there's a sense in which they'd kind of drifted back to their old ways. Not sinful ways necessarily, but that which they kind of knew. But they had discovered that even their old nets without Jesus caught nothing. Maybe someone said, Peter, you sure you picked up the right nets? You know? Those that we were mending were on the right, weren't they? You didn't get those. You know, the fish have gone in and straight out the net. They must have wondered, where have we gone wrong? This is our lake. This is where we worked. We always caught fish here. What, have we lost our touch? But then someone shouts out to them from the shore. Friends! It was 100 yards away, so he would have shouted, have you caught any fish? And they answered him, no! Cast your net on the right side. I mean, isn't it beautiful? Jesus calls them friends, not failures or fools. Friends. He knew they hadn't caught any fish. They don't recognize Jesus at first. And I wonder, how did Peter take that bit of advice? I mean, he's Peter, the fisherman. That's his name. He fishes. And there is someone telling him how to fish. Now, I'm aware we've got quite a few musicians and whatever amongst us. I often use the illustration of a drummer and a bass player. You know, we occupy the same space in our music. And there's often that thing that bass players and drummers kind of, I say don't get on, but there's that certain, and it's when the bass player turns to the drummer and says, why don't you try hitting the ride cymbal? And you kind of look and go, and you've been a drummer for how long? So here's Peter being told how to fish by a stranger. He doesn't know who that is at the moment. I visited a Padre friend down in Portsmouth. He's a Padre with the Royal Navy. We went out quite early one Saturday morning, and there was a sea mist. We couldn't even see across the road. And I wonder whether there was some kind of mist on the sea, and they couldn't quite see 100 yards. That is some distance, isn't it? Have you caught any fish? They put their nets on the right side of the boat, and we're told they caught a catch that they couldn't cope with. It was John that joined up the dots first, wasn't it? He said, it's the Lord. And then maybe their mind went back those 3 years to when they did have that catch, when Jesus was in the boat. Do you remember that time? Luke chapter 5. They caught that miraculous catch. John says, Peter, it's the Lord. And Peter, good old Peter, he doesn't hesitate. He jumps over the side. I'm guessing he knew how deep it would be, but he just had to get to Jesus. He has to get to Jesus, I believe, before anyone else. Before his mates. Because he knew he'd messed up. He knew something had happened, and that relationship with him and Jesus had fractured somehow. And he had to get to Jesus first. When was the last time that you felt you had to get to Jesus? That something had happened, something was going on in your life, You didn't want to talk to anyone else about it. Your friends didn't help. Not that they weren't being nice, it just wasn't. You needed to get to Jesus. And maybe that's you now. Maybe you just need to get to Jesus. And Peter wades through the water. He gets to the beach and he makes his way up the shore. And we read of a charcoal fire. Charcoal fire is mentioned twice. First time at Peter's denial. Second time at this breakfast. And I wonder whether, as Peter walked up the beach, struggled up the beach, that smell of charcoal took him back and kind of prepared him for what Jesus was about to do. You see, we often race past this breakfast on the beach because we want to get to that Peter, do you love me bit, which is important, obviously. But I think we miss the significance of what's going on here. Because Jesus doesn't avoid Peter's shame. He doesn't forgive us from afar. He meets us by our charcoal fire. He wants to heal that wound completely in a space that makes sense for us. And we don't know what Peter said to Jesus, do we? John's picked up information. He's put lots of information here as an eyewitness. Maybe John said to Peter, what did you say? No, ain't telling you. That was something that Peter was going to hold in his heart, just between him and Jesus. And maybe you need to meet Jesus by a charcoal fire. Not say anything. You just have to get to Jesus. Then Jesus says, and I love this, bring some of the fish that you've caught. And Peter went back to the boat and he dragged this net full of large fish. How many? 153. I was at a conference, I can't think who the preacher was now, but it was one of these wise old Christians that we all know. And he said, do you know why it says 153? And we all got out our notebooks. We thought, this is going to be flipping good. I need to note this. And he leant over and he said, there was 153 because that's how many there was. You go along the Basingstoke Canal in the fishing season. You ask any fisherman, how many fish have you caught? They will tell you. Because it's important to them. Peter needed, when he went to market, how many fish you got, Peter? Oh, hang on a minute. He knew how many fish. And Jesus said, bring some of what you have to offer, because I can still use that. Wow. And there they are, mates on a beach, having breakfast. And none of them dared ask, who are you? Because they knew. I can imagine them looking around each other going, it is, isn't it? It is. Even after rising from the dead, Jesus is still that servant king. Still gathering up the charcoal. Still handling the fish. And if you've handled it stinks. But there he is, not in his shiny white robe, but hands dirty amongst his friends. Doesn't lecture them on fishing. And right here we see an act of grace. He gives them bread, maybe as a reminder of his body. He gives them fish, a reminder of their task to go and make fishes of men. That's grace. Not explained, not necessarily earned, but just offered. Nothing flashy about that moment. Breakfast with his mates on a beach. So what does that mean to us? Because it has to mean something, doesn't it? For me, it means Jesus meets us in our everyday. Not just in the temple, but by our lakes, by our seashores, by our charcoal fires. He knows when we're empty, and he waits not to condemn, but to fill. He calls us friends after we've cocked it up. That king who conquered death had breakfast with his mates. He restores what's broken, denials, disappointments, and doubts. What kind of God does that? It's the kind who calls you friend. The kind who redeems each one of us by our charcoal fire. The one who doesn't judge, but forgives. Jesus, he didn't need help cooking that breakfast. He'd got it all done. Yet he still said to Peter, you bring what you have to the table, because I can still use it. And he invites each one of us to bring to the breakfast what we have. Maybe he's saying to some of us this morning, I knew I was going to say it this afternoon, come and have breakfast. Not, come and have breakfast. It's like, I know you've struggled. I know you've tried to go about it your own way. Come on, I'm waiting. Breakfast is ready. Come on, let's go. Let's have breakfast together.